Hi, this is Mrs. Kidman, and I just wanted to wrap up our discussion on properties of exponents by applying all of the different properties that we've talked about to different problems. So we're going to take a second to simplify a couple of different problems here using all of the properties that we've talked about. If you don't know what these properties are or you have questions about it, please check out the previous 3 videos that all discuss each of the different exponent properties that we will be using in this video. So this first one here, 3x squared times y over z to the negative 4th power, all put to the power of 2. So this uses a lot of those different properties. So the first thing that I want to do is I'm actually going to move this z to the negative 4th up to the top. So I'm going to rewrite this expression here, and I'm going to have 3x squared times y times z to the 4th, all to the power of 2. Now, that right there was using that negative exponents property. Now I'm going to use the power of a power property and the power of a product property together. So I'm going to distribute this power into each of these by that power of a product property. So now we have 3 squared. We're going to have 3 squared times x squared squared times y squared times z to the 4th squared. Now this 3 squared is going to give us a 9. An x squared squared is that product of that power of a power rule, which says I'm going to multiply those. So x to the power of 2 times 2, or x to the 4th, times y squared times, now this is going to be that power of the power rule again, z to the 4th squared, or z to the 4th times 2, which is going to be z to the 8th. And that's as simplified as it gets. So notice that in this problem itself, we had to use that negative exponent property, we had to use the power of a power property, we had to use the power of a product property, and we also had, and that's what we had to use. So we used 3 different properties here to solve this problem. Now let's take a look at this next one. Here we go. The very first thing I want to do is move the negatives to their respective locations. So this one here, this negative here is going to be moved down. So we have that y to the negative 3, which I'm actually going to shift down to my denominator there. And I have my x to the negative 3 that's going to shift up, and my y to the negative 4 that's going to shift up. So all of those are going to shift in their respective directions there. So let's try and shift those. And after I shift those, what I'm going to end up getting here is actually going to look totally different. I'm going to end up getting 12x to the 5th. This x to the 3rd comes up, so we get an x to the 3rd. I get a y to the 4th over my 10 y to the 3rd. Okay, now I need to simplify this. So what I'm going to do to simplify this is first I see I have an x to the 5th and an x to the 3rd that I'm multiplying together. And we can use that product of a power rule to multiply those. And that means we're going to add those exponents. So this is actually going to be 12x to the 8th, y to the 4th over 10y to the 3rd. Now notice this y to the 4th and this y to the 3rd. I can actually use that quotient of a power rule to simplify those by subtracting the top minus the bottom. So what I'm going to end up getting there is I'm going to get 12x to the 8th, y to the 4th minus 3, which is just a y, over 10. And then that's kind of what we're looking at. If I wanted to simplify this more, I could write that it's 6 over 5, because 12 and 10 both divide by 2, times x to the 8th times y. And that's what that would simplify down to. Kind of awesome. Now, in this one, we had to use that negative exponent property. We had to use the product of a power property. We had to use the quotient of a power property. Look at all those properties that we had to use there. Okay, now let's take a look at this last one. Now again, we want to start by moving these ones that have a negative exponent down to the denominator. or if they have a negative exponent in the denominator, I want to move that up to my numerator. So here I'm going to take a second and move those two, and let's rewrite that. So here I am, I've got 6, and instead of that x to the negative 7th, that negative 7th is going to move down. So we're going to have our 6, and then we're going to have y to the 5th, and this y to the 6th is going to move up, and then we're going to have our 8 and our x squared, and that x to the 7th is going to move down. So that moved down, that moved up, and this whole thing is still to the power of negative 2. Now, before I put everything to the power of negative 2, I'm going to see if I can simplify what's on the inside there. So I can use that product of a power rule to simplify these y's on top and these x's on bottom. So that's what I'm going to do. So we want to take our 6 times y to the 5th times y to the 6th. Well, they both have the same base of y, so I can actually do y to the 5 plus 6, and that's actually going to be y to the 11th. So we get 6 times y to the 11th, and then I can do that same thing with my x's, so I have my 8 and x to the 9th, because 2 plus 7. Now that whole thing is going to go to the power of negative 2. Now because it's negative, we're going to have to apply that. So let's look here. I've got 6 to the negative 2, y to the 11th times negative 2 over 8 to the negative 2 times x to the 9th to the negative 2. Now notice how all of those are negative exponents there. Now those negative exponents tell us that we have to shift those to the other side. So really what's going to happen is this fraction that we have up above is going to flip. So now we're going to look at 8 squared times x to the 9th squared over 6 squared times y to the 11th squared. Now all that we have to do is simplify these ones to the power of 2, and then we have to use that power of a power rule to simplify the other ones. So now I have 8 squared, which is 64, that we have there. So we've got a 64 x to the 9th squared. We're going to use that power of a power, so we're going to multiply those, so we actually get x to the 18th over 6 squared is 36, and y to the 11th squared is going to be y to the 11th times 2, which is going to end up giving us y to the 22nd. And that there, in a nutshell, is how we would simplify that. So in this one, we used the negative exponent rule. We used the product of a power rule. We didn't have to use the quotient of a power rule, but we did use the power of a power rule. We had to use the power of a product rule. We used almost all the rules here. So hopefully this helps you kind of understand how those properties, exponents work, and how we can use them in conjunction with one another to simplify an expression.